Most people waste hours in Excel because they don't know which functions actually matter. The truth is, of the 450 plus functions available, you only need about 10 to handle 80% of your work. Learn these and you'll work faster and more confidently than ever. As usual, you can download the example file with the links to comprehensive tutorials from the video description. Right, let's dive in. First up, lookup functions, a core Excel skill for connecting data and reshaping it. And the best place to start is with XLOOKUP, the modern replacement for VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP functions, and the only lookup function most people will ever need. Here I have some employee data. We can see on the Table Design tab that it's formatted in an Excel table called emp data. So I'll be using the table structured references consisting of the table name and column name, as you'll see shortly. Now let's say I want to find Chris Jones details, and I want to return them down here, so XLOOKUP. The lookup value, here I could type in Chris Jones as a hard keyed value, or I can simply reference the cell here containing his name. So let's go with that. Then the lookup array. Well, notice the first and last names are in separate columns. So I need to join them together. So the first one and there's a space between the first and last name. So let's concatenate the space and then we'll get the last name. Now I should point out that if you have a lot of XLOOKUP formulas like this, then it would be more efficient for Excel if you create a new column in the table that combines the first and last name into a full name and reference that instead of these two separate columns. But for this example, it's perfectly fine. Next, we have the return array. Now I can return one or more columns or the whole table. And I need the whole table here, so we'll select all of it. And it puts in the table name. That's perfect. Comma. If it's not found, we'll return the text not found. Now there are some further optional arguments, but most of the time this is all you'll need. So we're going to close parentheses there, press enter, and XLOOKUP spills the results across the columns. This spilling functionality is available with Microsoft 365 and Excel 2021 onward. Formulas that spill are called dynamic arrays. That is, the result of the formula are returned as an array of values. And I've got some more examples of dynamic arrays coming up. Okay, next let's use filter to pull just the rows that we need. For example, here I want to find the employees for the IT department. The first argument is the array or data that I want to extract. It could be one or more columns or all the columns in the table. I want all columns and it puts in the table name. Next are the filter criteria. I want to return rows in the table where the department equals the department name in this cell, comma. And if it's empty, I'm going to return the text, no records. Close parentheses on filter. And it's another dynamic array function that spills the results, both across the columns and down the rows. Now you can also use filter to return non-contiguous columns and specify multiple filter criteria, so be sure to check out the in-depth tutorial here. Next, I need a clean alphabetical list of all departments for a drop-down menu. And I can use the sort and unique functions to achieve this. I'm going to start with the unique function, and I want the list of departments. Close parentheses on unique, and it's another dynamic array formula, so it spills the results. Then I can use the sort function to sort the list, and here's the trick. When you're working with spilled arrays, instead of referencing all the cells, we can just reference the first cell, and then type in a hash sign, and Excel will automatically pick up the whole array, as you can see here. Now there's further optional arguments for sort, but for this example, we just need the first one, close parentheses, and press enter, and there's my sorted list. Now if any new departments are added to my table, the sort function will automatically update to include them, because I use the hash sign to reference the spilled array. So let's test it out. We'll change this one to HR, and keep your eye on these lists down here. HR will automatically appear. Of course, you don't need to write these as separate formulas. I can sort the results of the unique function in one formula, selecting the department, close unique, close sort, press enter, and there's my sorted results. Keep in mind that unique works on any data type, text, numbers, dates, and with sort you can specify the sort column, sort order, and even sort by columns instead of rows using the optional arguments. Next up is logic functions that let you test conditions and make decisions and control the flow of your calculations. Starting with the if function, it checks a condition and returns one result if it's true and another if it's false. So here I have a list of projects with varying budgets, timelines and priorities. I need to calculate the contingency budget, which will be 20% for critical projects and 10% for the rest. So my logical test checks if the priority cell equals critical. If it does, we're going to take the budget times 20% or 0.2. Otherwise, we're going to take the budget times 10% or 0.1. Close parentheses on if, and there's our contingency budget. Easy, huh? But what if we wanted 20% contingency for critical and high priority projects? In that case, I can go back in, and in my logical test here, I can use the OR function. The OR function is another logic function that returns true if either one of the criteria are true. So OR just allows me to have multiple criteria. If one of those returns true, it will return true. I've already got if priority equals critical. I also need if priority equals high, close parentheses on OR. If either one of these are true, it's going to calculate 20% of the budget, otherwise 10% of the budget. Close parentheses, and now we have 20% contingency for high and critical priority projects. Of course, if we required 2 or more criteria to be true, instead of using OR here, we can use the AND function. For example, if we wanted to limit 20% contingency to database projects with critical priority, we could replace this argument here and instead check if the type equals database. So both of these need to be true for the AND function to return true. And we can see this first one doesn't meet both criteria, so it's going to return false. Let's press enter, and you can see it's automatically copied down. So this one here meets both criteria, database and critical, and it's budgeted 20% contingency. These 3 functions cover myriads of scenarios with ease. The next step up from if are nested if formulas, and while there is a newer ifs function that somewhat simplifies nested ifs, it's less efficient because it evaluates every logical test and then returns the result for the first true match, whereas nested ifs stop evaluating at the first true result. So I'll demonstrate the more efficient nested if formulas. For example, let's say I want to identify which of these items are due, overdue or not due, and the loan period is 90 days. So we can use the if function to check if today's date, we're using the today function to return today's date, minus the loan date is greater than 90. If it is, then it must be overdue. If not, we can perform our second logical test by nesting another if, and that checks if today's date minus the loan date equals 90, then the loan must be due. Otherwise, everything else must be not due. And now I can close my second if and my first if, press enter, and we can see which items are due and not due, or overdue in the case of this one here. In this example, I've only nested 2 if formulas, but you can nest up to 64. However, if you have more than a few, then there's most likely a more efficient way to perform your calculation. Now for the bread and butter of business reporting, conditional aggregations. These are the functions that power dashboards and executive reports. The SUMIFS function enables you to sum data based on 1 or more criteria. For example, let's say I want to sum the budgets for database projects in the healthcare industry. So we start with SUMIFS. The range we want to sum, well, we want to find the budget. And then the next argument is the first criteria range, where we want to find whether the type, so we're looking up the type column, and the criteria is database, and we can just reference this cell containing the criteria. And then our next criteria range is the industry, and that is where it's healthcare. Now I can keep adding criteria range and criteria pairs, but that's all I need here. So close parentheses, and we get 365,418 for database projects in the healthcare industry. And I'm going to change the industry here to tech, and our SUMIFS automatically updates, making it super useful for dynamic reports. What if you need the count of projects that match your criteria? No problem, you can use COUNTIFS, which has a slightly simpler syntax in that you only need to provide criteria range and criteria pairs. For example, we can count the project types that match the type here, which is database, and for the industry that matches the industry here. And just like SUMIFS, we can keep adding criteria range and criteria pairs, but that's all I need for this example, and we get 3. For homework, you can try the other ifs functions like average ifs, min ifs, and max ifs, which use the same syntax as SUMIFS. Now let's move on to date functions, which are essential for aggregating data into months, quarters, and years, as well as forecasting and preparing schedules. One of the most common tasks is finding the first or last date in a month. For example, let's say the current date is 7th of October 2025, and from this date I need to derive the end of the month. It's super easy with the EO month or end of month function. The first argument is the start date, and if I want the last date of this month, I simply enter 0. In other words, I want to calculate the end of the current month. Close parentheses on EO month, and we get 31st of October. What if I want to find the first date of this month? Well, in that case, I can subtract a month. That's going to give me the end of the previous month. And then I just add one day to get the first of the month. So you can see with EO month, it's super versatile and especially handy if you want to aggregate data by months, quarters, or years. For example, here I have some typical sales data by date, category, and product. And let's say I want to find the sales for this current month. That is October. So we can use the SUMIFS function that we looked at previously. I'm summing the sales, comma. First criteria range, well, I'm summing based on dates. So the criteria range is the date column. And the criteria, well, that is where the dates are greater than or equal to the end of month. And we take the start date here. And we need to calculate the start date of the month. So remember, it's -1 to get to the end of the previous month, +1 to get to the first of the current month, comma. And then again, I need to reference the date column in my next criteria. We need to check if the sales date is also less than or equal to the end of the current month. So we're going to join this to the EO month function, taking the current date, comma, we want to get to the end of that month, so that's 0. Close EO month and close SUMIFS, press enter, and we get 44,600. And if we check by selecting October's sales here, we can see that's 44,600. And that's just one handy use for EO month. You can also use it to get a list of month start or month end dates to make reports quick and easy to build. For example, let's use EO month to return a list of month end dates for 2025. So our start date is going to be 12/2024. So that's December 2024. Notice that I'm only listing the month and year here, and that's perfectly fine. Comma. How many months are we adding? Well, we need to add 12 months, and therefore we need an array of numbers 1 through 12. So we can use the sequence function to return numbers 1 through 12. Close parentheses on sequence. If I just select sequence, you can see it's returning an array of numbers 1 through 12. So it's going to take the start date and add 1 month, then 2 months, then 3 months, then 4 months, and so on. Let's close EO month, press enter, and there's our list of month-end dates for 2025. Pretty cool. Another essential date function is Workday International, which enables you to calculate or list the next workdays a specific number of days after a start date, while ignoring weekends and holidays. And don't worry, you can specify days that are weekends and holidays in your locale. Let's start by calculating 5 working days from January 2nd. So we're going to use Workday International. The start date, I'm going to use the date function to enter it. So it's 2025, January, and the 2nd. Close date. And remember, we want 5 working days after January 2nd, so that's 5. And in the weekend argument, I can specify which days are my weekends. For me, it's Saturday and Sunday, so that's 1. But notice you can choose any days or even just 1 day off. I'm going to enter 1 for Saturday and Sunday, comma, and here I can specify my holiday dates, which could be a list in a range of cells, or if there's only 1 date, you can enter it here. So let's do that. We'll say 2025, January 6 is a holiday for me. Close parentheses on date, close workday, press enter. You can see it returns the 10th of January. And I've got calendar here so we can easily check that it's calculated correctly. So we started on the 2nd. And we wanted to add 5 working days, ignoring the weekend, which is Saturday and Sunday for me, and the 6th, which is a holiday. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 takes us to the 10th of January, and that's what Workday International returned. But that's not all you can do with the Workday International function. It's also super handy for returning a list of dates for building schedules, etc. Let's say I want a list of 10 dates from the 1st of Jan 2025, skipping Friday through Monday because we deserve a super long weekend each week. So Workday International, again, I'll use the date function to enter the start date, which is January 1, 2025. How many days do I want to return? Well, I need an array of days, 1 through 10, so we'll use the sequence function to return that array. And instead of choosing from the built-in weekends, I can specify the working days with a 1 for days off and a 0 for working days, starting with double quotes, and then Monday is the first day I need to specify. Well, remember, we want to have that off. So that's going to be a 1. Then we're going to work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They're zeros, they're work days. And then we're having Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. So that's my list of work days and non-work days. I can also add holidays here, but I think we've got enough time off. Let's close parentheses on Workday International, and we get a list of 10 working days. So you can see with this technique, I can completely customize the work and rest days. Perfect for shift work, part-time schedules, retail operations, or even international teams with different working days. Now notice it starts on January 2nd. That's because sequence begins with 1. Let's just select it, and we can see 1 is the first number. So the formula adds 1 workday to January 1, skipping directly to January 2nd. In our final category, we'll look at custom functions. The Lambda function lets you create custom reusable functions that work exactly like built-in Excel functions. Think of it as building your own personal Excel toolkit. Lambda takes input parameters and returns a calculation using those parameters. Once created, you can use it throughout your workbook. This means instead of copying complex formulas and hoping your users and you don't make errors, you define the logic once in the Lambda, then reuse it as required. For example, here I have a list of dates, and I want to check if they fall within the start and end dates. What we ideally need is a between function, but there's no such function in Excel. However, we can use the median function to achieve a similar result. Let's take a look. So median of the date we're checking, the start date, and the end date. Close median, and as you'd expect, it returns the median date. Now all we need to do is simply check if our date equals the median date. Press enter. Now we can see where the dates match. We know the date falls between the start and end date, and our formula returns true. Otherwise, it returns false. And while this formula works, it's not obvious or easy for beginners to use. So it's the perfect candidate to convert into a custom function using Lambda. Let's do it in this column here. Equals Lambda. First, we need to name our variables or parameters, and they are the date, the start date, and the end date. Then we need to write the calculation we want Lambda to perform using the variable names we just declared. So we want to check, does the date equal the median of the date, the start date, and notice they're coming up in the IntelliSense, or the end date, so you can just tab to enter them. Close median, close Lambda. So there's my Lambda formula, and to test it, all I need to do is open a new set of parentheses and insert the values for the variables. So the first one is the date, the next one is the start date, and then we want the end date, which is under there. Close parentheses and press enter, and you can see it returns the same results as our formula here. So it's working as planned. However, in this format, it's even harder than our median formula here. To simplify it, all we need to do is copy the actual Lambda part, not this section with the variables on the end, and we'll define this formula as a name. And we do that on the Formulas tab, Define Name. We'll call it Between Inclusive, because what it's actually doing is checking if these dates are between these dates or inclusive of them. So we can see here the 1st of Jan 2025 is considered between the start and end date. You can see it's returned true there. So we're going to call the function between inclusive, and then in the function I'll delete that and paste in my Lambda formula. You can see it there. Now in the comment we can paste in a little description that's going to help the user understand what the function does, and I'll click OK. And then in this column here we'll test it out. So equals between, and notice it comes up in the IntelliSense like any other function, and we get the tooltip that I just pasted into the comment. That's the one we want. Tab to insert it. Now it gives me the arguments, so I just need to insert them. The date, the start date, and the end date. Close parentheses, press enter, and there's my Lambda returning the same results, but considerably simpler than our original median function. So consider using Lambda to build company-specific calculators, standardize complex calculations across teams like this one, or develop industry-specific formulas that non-technical users can easily apply. Mastering these functions will take you far in Excel, but the new Copilot function goes even further, enabling you to ask questions in plain language and get instant answers. Watch this video to see how it works. I'll see you there.